Okay, let's dive in. Just picture those early computers for a second. Giant machines, right? Filling whole rooms.
Absolutely massive things.
And now, look at the device you're probably using right now, maybe even holding in your hand. The power difference is just staggering.
It really is an incredible story, that journey from there to here. Almost unbelievable unless you trace the steps.
And that's exactly what we're going to do. This is our deep dive into how computing hardware evolved from those, room-sized dinosaurs right up to the AI that's starting to change everything.
Mm.
And we'll peek ahead too.
Yeah, and we're drawing heavily from this really interesting piece called From Tubes to AI, Computing's Scaling Journey. That's our main guide today.
Right. So our mission here is pretty simple. We want to help you quickly grasp the key moments, the big ideas like Moore's Law that drove all this progress, see how AI is kind of rewriting the rules and look at the challenges and, well, the amazing potential still out there.
We're aiming to give you that quick download, basically.
Exactly. For you.
Mm.
So where do we start? The very beginning, I guess?
Got to go back to the start. The source points us to the great-grandparents of it all. Vacuum tubes?
Vacuum tubes, not chips. These were actual glass tubes, kind of like light bulbs.
Pretty much, yeah. About that size. They were the first things that could act like an electronic switch controlling electricity flow. That on-off switching is the absolute bedrock of digital computing, the zeros and ones.
Okay, so they made electronic calculation possible. But they weren't exactly perfect, were they? The source mentioned some major drawbacks.
Oh, definitely not perfect. Huge drawbacks. They were physically enormous, for one, fragile, too, and they were power hogs. Seriously, power hungry.
Like how much power?
Well, think about early computers like ENIAC. They needed massive air-conditioned rooms and used enough electricity to, power a small neighborhood.
A whole neighborhood.
Oh,
Just for one computer.
wow.
And reliability. I love the source's line on that.
Huh, yeah, about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. You were constantly swapping out burned-out tubes.
You couldn't build anything too complex or it would just break down all the time.
Exactly. They were a breakthrough, sure, but totally impractical for most uses.
Okay, so that couldn't last. How did we get from those fragile glass bulbs to something better?
The real revolution started at Bell Labs, 1947. The invention of the transistor.
The transistor. Okay, that sounds important.
It was the game changer. It did the same job switching, amplifying, but it was tiny in comparison. Used way less power, much more reliable. Solid state.
So basically, it miniaturized the fundamental building block.
Precisely. And that meant computers could finally start to shrink. But that wasn't the only leap. The next big thing was the integrated circuit.
Right, putting lots of transistors together on one piece of silicon. Robert Noyce and Jack Kilby get the credit there.
Yep, their independent work was key. It wasn't just transistors either. You could put resistors, capacitors, other bits all together on one chip. And the source stresses this. They could be packed together in a modular way.
Modular. Why was that specific word so important?
Because it meant you could design standard building blocks like logic gates, memory cells, that sort of thing, and combine them easily on the chip made design way simpler, manufacturing too. And data moved faster between components. It really set the stage for the whole modern electronics industry.
Okay, so tubes to transistors, transistors grouped into integrated circuits. And then came a really pivotal moment, didn't it, 1971?
Intel's 4004. Huge moment. The world's first microprocessor on a single chip.
Tiny little thing, the source says. Like a fingernail.
About that size, yeah.
And how many transistors did they cram onto that fingernail-sized chip back then?
2,300.
Only 2,300. That sounds tiny now.
It does now,
Right.
but back then it was revolutionary. Because for the first time, the whole central processing unit, the CPU, the computer's brain, it was all on one chip. Before that, you needed multiple chips working together.
Ah, okay. So it wasn't just smaller. It was the integration of all the core logic onto one piece.
That's the key insight. And that single chip idea is what led directly to personal computers and eventually, the super powerful phones and devices we all rely on today.
And the engine driving all this miniaturization and power increase for decades? That was Moore's Law, right?
Gordon Moore's observation, yeah, back in 1965. He noticed this trend. The number of transistors you could fit on a chip was roughly doubling every couple of years. And the cost was going down, too.
And it wasn't just an observation, was it? It sort of became a target for the industry.
Totally. It functioned like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It guided R&D, set targets. Companies push hard to keep that pace going.
And the results are just, well, you compare that 4004 chip
With its 2,300 transistors.
to the chips we have now. What's the count today?
The most advanced ones?
Oh,
Over 50 billion transistors.
50 billion on one chip. It's almost impossible to really picture that density. That's exponential growth for you.
And the upshot is the device in your pocket isn't just way more powerful than computers from a few decades ago, it's also way cheaper and uses far less energy for what it does.
So how did the engineers do it? How did they keep that pace, keep shrinking things and packing more in year after year? The source mentions some key principles.
Yeah, there were a few core ideas driving it. The most obvious one is miniaturization and density, just making everything smaller.
Shrinking the transistors themselves.
Exactly, making them smaller and smaller so you can pack more into the same area. Today's transistors are just a few nanometers wide. This source says thousands of times thinner than a human hair. That's how you get billions on a chip.
Incredible precision. Okay, what else?
Then there's scalability. It's one thing to make tiny components, but you have to make them all work together effectively as you add billions of them.
Right, the complexity grows enormously.
Hugely. So engineers had to figure out how to manage things like heat, getting power to all those tiny parts, making sure signals arrive at the right nanosecond. The overall performance had to scale up as the number of components grew.
You can't just add more parts. The whole system has to get better.
Exactly. And linked to that is the third principle, power and efficiency. This became super important, especially with mobile devices.
Yeah, can't have your phone melting or the battery dying in 10 minutes.
Right. So chips got really sophisticated at managing power, like only using full power for demanding tasks and scaling back otherwise. It's a constant balancing act.
So, making things smaller,
Yeah.
making the whole system scale efficiently, and managing power. Those were the keys to writing Moore's Law.
Pretty much, yeah. For decades.
And the effect on everyday life. I mean, the source lists examples, and it feels like science fiction became reality.
It really did. Stuff we just take for granted now.
Like transportation.
Yeah.
Modern cars have dozens of microprocessors. And think about EVs or self-driving tech that relies completely on massive computing power.
Absolutely essential. Or communication. Mobile phones. They went from these expensive bricks to, well, everyone has one. And that Apollo comparison always gets me.
Oh, yeah.
The source points out your smartphone today is vastly more powerful than the computers that guided the Apollo missions to the moon.
To the moon. Compared to, I don't know, ordering a pizza on an app. It's wild.
Right. And then healthcare. MRI machines, patient monitors, all becoming more powerful, more portable. Genetic sequencing used to take years, cost billions. Now, hours and way, way cheaper. It opens up whole new medical possibilities.
Totally transforming medicine.
Yeah.
And, of course, entertainment.
Oh, yeah. Gaming went from like 8-bit sprites to these incredibly realistic 3D worlds. And
Wow.
streaming changed how we watch movies, listen to music, everything.
All built on that foundation of shrinking transistors and Moore's Law.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're hearing the rules are changing again. The age of AI. The source suggests this isn't just more of the same scaling.
No, it's a fundamentally different model, really. Think about traditional computing. Humans write programs, specific instructions, and the computer runs them on data to get an answer.
Okay.
AI kind of flips that. The system learns from data, from its environment, and it essentially creates its own instructions, its own model, to solve a problem.
So instead of us telling it exactly how to do something, it figures out a way itself by looking at examples.
Precisely. Which is why it's so powerful for complex problems where maybe we don't know the exact best instructions. It can find patterns and create solutions that are adaptive, dynamic. The source uses weather forecasting as an example.
Okay, how so?
Traditional weather models use complex physics equations, algorithms written by scientists. They work, but they struggle with the sheer chaos sometimes. An AI model can look at vast amounts of historical weather data and find subtle patterns to build maybe a more flexible, potentially more accurate prediction model itself.
Interesting. So if Moore's Law was the driving force for the chip era, what drives this AI era? Are there AI scaling laws?
Yes, exactly. AI has its own scaling laws. They basically predict how much better an AI gets if you give it more resources. But the resources are different. The source highlights 3 big ones.
Okay, what's the first one?
Computational power. Training these huge AI models takes absolutely enormous amounts of processing, much more than standard CPUs were designed for.
Right, that's where things like GPUs come in, graphics cards.
Exactly. GPUs and even more specialized chips like TPUs from Google, they're designed for the kind of parallel calculations AI needs. The compute needed for the biggest models today is, Well, it's astronomical compared to just 10 years ago.
Okay, huge computation. What's number two?
Model size. This is basically how complex the AI's internal brain is. It's measured in parameters. Think of them as connection points or variables the AI learns. More parameters let it capture more complex patterns.
And these models are getting huge, right?
Oh, yeah. Modern language models, they can have hundreds of billions, even trillions of parameters. That's partly why they can generate text that sounds so, well, human.
Trillions. Wow. Okay, compute power, model size. What's the third factor?
Data set size. AI learns from data. So
Hmm.
generally, the more data you train it on, the better it performs. And the source really emphasizes this. It's not just about quantity. Quality is crucial.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Pretty much. The data needs to be accurate, diverse, representative of the real world. Otherwise, the AI learns flawed patterns or biases. Getting enough high-quality data is a major challenge.
So AI scaling depends on this triangle. Massive compute, massive models, and massive good data. It feels like a whole different kind of technological race.
It really is. And it's pushing innovation in different directions. Chip design, yes, but also data infrastructure algorithms.
But are we going to hit limits here too? Moore's law is slowing down because of physics. Does AI scaling have its own walls it might hit? The source talks about challenges for both, right?
Definitely. For traditional scaling, the kind Moore described, we are hitting real physical limits. When you try to make transistors just a few atoms across, quantum physics starts doing weird things,
Like what?
like electrons tunneling through barriers they shouldn't cross. Basically, they leak, making the switches unreliable. You're fighting fundamental physics at that scale.
Okay, that sounds like a hard limit. What else?
Heat management. This is a huge one. You cram billions of switching components into a tiny space. They generate immense heat. The source uses this incredible analogy. It says the power density, the heat generated in a small area on some modern chips, is approaching that of a nuclear reactor core.
Seriously, a nuclear reactor. That's intense. How do you even cool that?
It's a massive engineering problem.
Right.
Getting the heat out without needing, a fire hose of coolant is incredibly difficult and expensive.
Wow. Okay, physical limits, heat, any others?
There's also a theoretical limit on energy efficiency. A physicist named Landauer figured out there's a bare minimum amount of energy needed to perform any computation, just to erase a bit of information.
A fundamental floor.
Yeah, we're not right up against it yet, but it tells us that computation can't get infinitely more efficient. There is an endpoint, theoretically.
So physics, heat, energy. Sounds like the easy gains from just shrinking things might be over. Is there hope for continued progress, especially with AI needing so much power and data?
Well, the source does highlight one area that could really help, particularly on the data side for AI. And that's the Internet of Things, or IoT.
You mean all those smart thermostats, cameras, sensors, watches,
Yeah.
everything connected?
Exactly. Think about all the data those devices are generating constantly, out in the real world. As IoT grows, it could become a massive source of training data for AI.
So instead of trying to manually collect and label data, you could have devices designed to gather useful information automatically.
Precisely. Devices could even do some initial processing right where the data is collected, making it easier to get the high-quality, diverse data sets that AI needs to keep improving. It helps tackle that data bottleneck.
That makes sense, using the connected world itself to feed the AI's learning.
It's a key potential enabler for future AI scaling.
So looking back at this whole story, from vacuum tubes filling rooms to transistors thinner than hair to AI learning from the world, it's just an absolutely mind-bending journey.
It really is. And the source argues pretty convincingly that we're still, kind of in the early stages of what AI might bring.
Yeah, it predicts the next decade could see changes we can barely conceive of now as AI gets woven more deeply into everything.
And what's really fascinating is this potential convergence, right? You have this incredibly refined traditional computing power, maybe hitting some limits, but then you combine it with the learning ability of AI. That combination could unlock breakthroughs.
In areas like
Drug discovery, finding new materials, maybe even modeling climate change solutions more effectively. Things that need both massive calculation and pattern recognition or adaptive learning.
So even with the challenges, the pace of innovation isn't really slowing down.
Doesn't seem like it.
And as the source wraps up, the future isn't just about overcoming those physical limits we talked about. It's also about how we choose to use these incredibly powerful tools.
Right. How do we harness this blend of raw power and learning intelligence?
How do we make sure it benefits everyone? That really leaves us, and you listening, with a big thought. What does this ongoing accelerating journey mean for you personally? How will you navigate and shape your relationship with this technology as it reshapes the world?